Hey, welcome to the podcast. I am Joel here with my dad.
And I'm Rick. What you want to talk about today, Joel? What's up?
Well, this whole year, our topic is conquering mountains. Mm-hmm. Last month was relational mountains. We talked about some interesting stuff, rejection. We talked about how to help your spouse change. Very popular episode. You might enjoy that. If you've got a spouse that needs to be changed, we tell you how to do it. You may not believe us, but go listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
This month, it's March, right? So in theory, spring is starting. We may get one more Arctic blast down here in Texas. Up north, they may get several more. But I wanted to talk about seasons because there's something in us that I think we all like certain seasons, but then other seasons we go, oh, I don't like this season. But part of life, King Solomon says, is there's a time for everything. There's a season for everything, a time for every purpose under heaven. Or was that the birds that sang that?
Well, both.
Okay, yeah. It's not based off of Solomon.
I think Solomon got it from the birds.
But I want to talk specifically about seasons where we're forced to start over. One of the most potent quotes that I've ever read, a guy named Gene Edwards in his book, The Tale of Three Kings. And it's if you ever want to survive the church, you need to read this book. I don't necessarily like the conclusions in it, but I think he's right. And it's Tale of Three Kings, basically. Well, read the book, short book. But one of the quotes,
Study in Brokenness, or something.
Yeah, Study in Brokenness, which is a horrible subtitle because I don't want that. But so the thing he said though is this: beginning empty-handed and alone frightens the greatest of men, but it also shows how confident they are that God is with him. And I've seen in my life several times where there have been seasons where God asked me to start over again. And usually it wasn't because of anything I had done wrong. It was just an asking me to start kind of from scratch with something. And I had to begin again and feeling like I didn't have the resources. Ultimately, I realized as you get older that everything builds in life on itself. So you always do have the resources you need. You got them in some previous season. But at the time when you get asked to do something, it can feel like you're asked to do something that you don't have the resources to do. So there are times we have to start over. And I've talked to so many people that are that way. They have to start over. They have to either come back to a town. They said, I'm never going to go back there to that small town, those small town people, small-minded people. And then they end up back there and it's very humbling. Or after a relationship falls apart or something and you're forced to start again there. And I want to talk about that. The idea, why would God ask us to start in new seasons? I mean, ultimately, I think he's building on it, but the idea of when you're forced to start again, how do you keep perspective on that and that conquering that mountain of feeling like I'm a failure? Like you're supposed to go up and up and up. We always have this idea in our mind that, ever improving, always increasing, but sometimes it's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back.
Yeah. Well, of course, the story Gene Edwards was referring to was with David. And, he was doing fine out there watching the sheep, and then he runs across Saul, and Saul gets jealous of him, and Saul starts throwing spears at him. And so he has to flee, and he can't go back home because he would endanger his parents and family. So he finds himself out there with nothing and nobody, and just out hiding out, running from the king. And so, in David's case, the question being, why would God ask us to start over? And in David's case, it was because God was preparing him to rule. And sometimes again, looking at David's case, sometimes you have to be broken free from the comfort zone in order to grow more. And I think that was it. And I think that would probably be for all of our case. The thing is, God wants the best for us. And the reason, for example, he separated Israel and Judah was because he had a special purpose for Judah, and Israel was not going to go along with that. And so for Judah to fulfill its purpose, it had to be separated. For David to fulfill his purpose, he had to even be separated from his brothers and from his family so that he could begin to be, he wasn't then just the younger brother, he was then could become the king.
Yeah. So while you get that phone call, did you not read the sign that said, please turn off all devices before you stepped into our studio, Dad?
I did
Come
not.
on.
Where is it? I think it fell down. I think I'm sitting on it, actually.
Well, since we do no editing on this show, that's going to have to stay.
That's going to be in there.
So,
yeah.
All right. So here's the thing. That quote is actually from the part of David's story where he's forced to leave Israel or Jerusalem when his son Absalom rises up against him. And he says, no, if God's done with me, peace out. If he wants me to be here, I'll come back.
Yeah.
And it's this idea that sometimes God will ask you, sometimes we fight to hold on to certain seasons and certain, places we were, positions, and we have to hold that loosely. I heard Elizabeth Elliot, I think she said, it was Corrie ten Boom. She said, hold everything in your hands lightly. Otherwise it hurts when he has to rip it from your hands.
Yeah.
It's like, oof. That's true though. And so the idea was David was comfortable enough to recognize maybe the season's over here. Yeah. And maybe I need to step aside. God's able to put me back in position if he wants to, but I'm not going to fight to hang on to something that may have been a cyclical part of the journey. This wasn't my final destiny. And that can be hard when you seem like you've arrived at the pinnacle. Right. I mean, being king's pretty pinnacle. And then he had to step down so that he was trying to avoid bloodshed is what he was trying to do, because his son was preparing to come in and lead a civil war essentially.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and of course you're actually, this is a topic real close to my heart, because there've been several times when I've been forced to start over again, and sometimes not by choice, sometimes by attack,
by other people's choices. Sometimes, yeah. And I've always I was impressed very early on. I guess maybe reading that book, but I think even before that, I just heard teaching on the fact that letting God be your defense, letting God be your deliverer, and the fact that David did not fight and he entrusted himself to God. And it says that about Jesus too. When he was reviled, he didn't revile back. Instead, he entrusted him who was able to deliver him. And so whenever those things have happened in my life, it's not easy to do, but I've tried to take the same approach. Okay, God, I'm not going to fight back for this. If I fight back, what good's it going to do? Even if I win, a lot of people are going to be hurt in the meantime. And so it's better to just entrust it to God and trust that he's got something better for you in the next phase, in the next season. I was talking to a man recently, and his wife had filed for divorce, and he acknowledges his part in it, the failures he had in the marriage. But he said, it's hard because he said, I watch her making decisions that I know the more she takes those decisions, the greater the likelihood our marriage is not going to recover. And he's like, I want to get back together. I want our marriage to be healed. I want it to fix. But he's like, every step she's taking is taking us further and further away from it. So he said, I'm having to constantly come to this realization that it may not happen. And he's like, it's like a death inside. Yeah. And I thought, I told him that's the only thing you can do really though. I was like, if you fought as hard as you could for the marriage, and the person just does not want that, and you're forced to start over again, the greatest thing you can do is grieve it. I mean, back to David again. Yeah. He lost this child he begged for God to save. It was the child of his infidelity, right? But he asked God to save this child. God did not save the child. And then he picks himself up, dusts himself off, and moves on, and just realizes apparently this wasn't God's will. Yeah. And he moves into the next thing, and he has to, he's not starting over, but that's a fascinating thing, the idea that you let go sometimes in order to embrace the new season. And what that looks like is coming into the new season, feeling like you're starting from scratch or with nothing, going back to the place you vowed to never go back to. You're like, I'll never leave this. I'll never come back to this town. I see that with a lot of people having to come back to towns. I felt that way back the town I'm in right now. Yeah. All of my worst childhood memories. I ran into somebody from Holy Cross Lutheran, the school where all of my worst childhood memories happened, and not because of the Lutherans, but because of the teacher. And I saw her, and she's like, "What are you doing back here?" I'm like, I asked myself that initially. Why am I back here? I was like, I'll never go back to that little town. Now I find the town actually quite wonderful, but we came back here and in some ways had to start over. I've seen we are actually starting over, but we had to make new friendships. We had to find, everything's changed. We've changed. Yeah. Everything's changed. And so it is starting over. But I've done it enough in my life now, started over. We've moved like 10 times that it's not as intimidating to me, but it can be hard.
Yeah. Well, the same thing. We had no plans of coming back. I planned on staying on the mission field for the rest of our lives. Mm-hmm. But this is where the Lord has us, and so we're back here. So, think about when you talk about David, too, and the child died. That was the child of infidelity. And then it says right after that, he went in and comforted Bathsheba. And after that, then Solomon's born. And so, I mean, what a picture of God bringing good, who was to be the next king. I mean, it was evil, it was bad, it was ugly. He killed a very loyal man. I mean, there's just all this ugliness.
Yeah, David was not the most upright of men.
No, he was not at all. He had a lot of major faults, a very poor father. He was good at killing people. That he was really good at.
Which is what kept him from being able to build God's temple. He said, "You got too much blood on your hands, buddy.
You're a man of blood." Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, but the thing is, God brought such a beautiful thing out of that, and that should be encouraging for us. For those of us who've not fallen, which I don't know who that would include. It ought to be a warning that because there was. Nathan said, because of that, the sword will never leave your household. That's Absalom coming out of it. So horrible things happen to his family because of it. But also, for those of us who have fallen, it's a great encouragement that look what God brought out of this beauty from ashes type of thing.
Which can be encouraging if you're forced to start over again because of some really bad decisions you've made.
Yeah.
I work with a lot of people that they're literally having to start from scratch with family, with finances, with career, because they made some very bad choices, and where they're at now has left them, midlife starting over, and they're going, man, I should have been way farther along than this, but I am where I am. Yeah. And, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. And sometimes you have to start, actually always you have to start right where you are. You can't start right where you want to be. Yeah. You have to start where you are and then build from there. And I've seen God oftentimes in certain seasons will accelerate things. If you plant something in the winter, it's not going to grow. It's just the nature of it, or it'll grow and it'll die quickly. But if you plant in the right season, you actually plant towards the end of winter, and then spring it pops up, and you may see exponential growth in spring where you don't see it the rest of the time. So some of it is timing, right?
Yeah, because there are seasons, and there are seasons where things just lie dormant. There are seasons where we need that rest. It's weird to me that God created us to where we absolutely need to rest. Mm-hmm. And that rest is healing, and that rest is restorative, and winter is kind of the time of rest for things.
Remind me, that needs to be our next episode, Seasons of Rest. That's a good one.
Okay.
I had another plan, but we're going to insert that one in there.
All right, we'll do that.
Y'all hold us on to this. All right.
Hold us to it.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, I think it's important that what you just said about you have to remember to start where you are. Don't be looking back. Don't let the past define you. It's not really a race. It's a matter of using what you've got. And God, as you said too, God many times can bring an acceleration to the fruit of that all.
Yeah.
So, you just can't keep looking back. You can't wallow in the mud. You just have to kind of get up. I look at it this way. It's like a fighter. Doesn't matter how many times he gets knocked down. As long as he gets up one more time, he's still in the fight.
Right.
He hasn't lost. As long as you just get back up, get back in the ring, keep fighting, keep going, and you'll get there.
I'd say sometimes too, if you can look at having to start over with a new perspective of, hey, maybe here's a chance to kind of reinvent myself.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. The idea of, in fact, Brooks talks about that in the book we always talk about lately, Strength to Strength. Yeah. In that book, Strength to Strength, he talks about how those who go the furthest in life are the ones who are capable of kind of reinventing themselves every few years, adding a new element to who they are, where they're not. Do you remember that part in that book, or is that a different book? I think
I think it is there.
Yeah, he says it's reinventing yourself, where you're not just starting over completely, but you're saying, I'm going to delve into a new aspect of something. And you always, when you start from the beginning, you always look like a beginner. So you got to risk looking foolish, risk looking dumb, which I think a lot of us are afraid of that. Like if I start something new, I'm going to look dumb, and right now I'm seen as the expert over here. And we have to be willing to look foolish to start over like that sometimes.
Yeah, and realize too, you're not really starting over from nothing, because you have a foundation of what you've built on, what you've experienced. You know one way not to make a light bulb, for example.
That's right. Yeah. Well, as somebody who's had to start over several times, I would say it can feel discouraging, but I really do believe that God places everything in our life, even dumb stuff that we've done, even mistakes that we're paying the price for and we're having to start over for. I have seen over and over again that if you will just lean into what he wants to give you, he'll give you the grace in every season for what you need in that season. And you have what you need in that season to do what you're called to do in that season. Yeah. Even if it's starting from scratch, you're going to have what you need to accomplish what he's called you to do.
There again, you go back to David. He didn't start over from nothing. He was out. He thought he was on his own, but God sent people to him, and all of a sudden he's got an army around him.
Thanks for listening. Please consider sharing this with your friends on the platform of your choice. For more from Joel Malm, visit joelmalm.com. For more from Rick Malm, visit rickmalm.com. Our podcast music was produced by Alex Burleson.